Welcome to the Woman Aesthetic Podcast. Join us in seeking deeper meaning and striving to live fully in our womanhood. Welcome to the Woman Aesthetic Podcast, where we discuss essence, personhood, and the role of women. I am your host, Anna, and today I'll be talking with Mary Stanford about the relationship between men and women and her book, The Obedience Paradox: Finding True Freedom in Marriage. Mrs. Stanford, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna.
This is such a treat. And just so that people can get to know you a little bit, could you tell us a couple things about yourself?
Yes, I am a wife of 24 years to my wonderful husband, Trey. I am the mother of 7 children. And during that time, I've homeschooled for many, many years. But I also have given many talks sort of in the area of, theology in general, but with a specific emphasis on sort of the theology of the body, on human personhood and marriage. And for the last, about 18 years, I've been teaching the occasional course, sort of as an adjunct professor at Christendom College. So that's just been such a privileged time to get to share my faith and my expertise, and to just have that feedback from students, the questions, and pondering these mysteries that have really helped me articulate them, I hope, in clearer and clearer ways. And it ultimately led to, yes, the writing of this book. And so much of what I've taught through the years is distilled in it. So I'm really grateful to have gotten to do it.
Well, I'm so glad you wrote the book, because when you told me that you wrote the book and I read it, I was like, okay, thank you. Yes, this is everything everybody needs to hear, and it's all in one place, and it's really digestible, but you did it in such a way that it really delved into things. And I don't know, I just loved it. So it's going to be a staple. I have it right here. It's going to be a staple in my home. It's going to be on my shelf, and I probably will refer to it often as we, continue our marriage. But yeah, so you have this incredible book out. It's called The Obedience Paradox: Finding True Freedom in Marriage. And like I said, you do really a deep dive into the relationship between men and women in marriage. And you really break it down. I love that. And you really go into the details of marriage. And so I want to start off with first talking about obedience, because it's so important. And I think people they think like, slave and master, at the extreme of it. But I really want you to talk about obedience, because you talked about it so beautifully in the book. And then we can get to, the elephant in the room, the headship and submission. But yeah, let's talk about obedience first. Like, what is it? And, why do people struggle with it? Let's get into that.
Yeah. And there is, it's almost as though today in our culture, there's like an allergy to that word. We hear that word. And as you pointed out, it's almost as though people feel that when I mention the prospect of obedience, that I'm suggesting something that is at odds with human freedom, right? And that just can't be the case. If a huge part of what makes us human persons is that we are made in the image of God, and one dimension of that is we are free agents, right? Then how can obedience be a concept consistent with being a human person? But I think part of that is the way in which we sort of misuse the word obey. We talk about doggy obedience school, or we talk about, maybe the planets sort of obeying the laws of nature. We speak of, or an animal obeying its instinct. We talk about creatures that don't have freedom as obeying, but really those creatures aren't free to disobey. They act in accordance with their nature, right? We call that instinct, or nature's design. And so they're not free to deviate from that design. And so we're really using the word obey in a way that isn't applicable. To truly obey means you have a choice whether or not to obey or to disobey, right? It assumes human freedom. And so when we hear about someone obeying, it actually implies that they are freely embracing the will of another. when you force someone to obey your will, I'm saying I use that word obey, when you force someone to do your will, right? That's really a mockery of obedience. That's force. That's slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to willingly, to freely choose to make another's will your will, right? That's something only a free creature can do. And that concept is scary, maybe, right? But we do it all the time. I want what you want. When we say that, right? That actually becomes the foundation of human relationships, right? Of what brings people together. So anyway, that's sort of how the book starts, just sort of pondering why do we have such an issue with obedience? But again, it's not just a modern resistance.
Mm-hmm.
It goes all the way back to the beginning. It goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. The struggle to say, yes, I'm going to accept what you're offering. I'm going to make my will one with yours. It goes back to Adam and Eve. It goes back to that original resistance of, oh, that makes me feel very vulnerable doing that, making your will my will. And so, of course, throughout the book, we kind of meditate on Our Lady. Mm-hmm. When Our Lady says, let it be done to me according to your word, right? She is freely saying, yes, what you want, I want, right? Which is, again, a very vulnerable proposition. She's opening herself to something beyond her own imaginings of what maybe she had planned for her life. But to me, that's the greatest expression of her personhood, that she could say that, right? She's not becoming a slave in that moment. She says, behold, the handmaid of the Lord, I'm your handmaid. I want to do what you are proposing, right? I want to say yes to this. So in meditating upon that, only a free creature could do that. So we have to sort of reframe our idea of obedience as being slavish. Mm-hmm. Slavery is a mockery of obedience, right? If you're forced to do something under threat of someone else, that's not really obedience.
Right. Well, when I was reading that part in your book, I was thinking, God doesn't even, if we were thinking of obedience as that, like, you have to do what I tell you to do or else, God doesn't even put it that way to us. Like, he doesn't do that. So why would he say we were subject like that to another person in this world who's so imperfect, who's not him? And in that way, it would be putting that person above him, And so I was just thinking of that, and I was like, oh, that is so sad. Like, if we could just sit and digest it, like you put it in your book, it was so clear. I was like, oh my goodness, this is it. Like, we just have been thinking about it all wrong, in my opinion.
That's such a beautiful point, because really, to understand and live any of the gospel teaching, right, it's presuming, right, that it's ultimately an expression. All of our human relationships are ultimately going to be an expression of our relationship to God. Mm-hmm. But there's a quote, and I think I do include it in the very end of my book, but St. Augustine says, God created us without our consent, but he won't save us without our consent, right? Our powerful and awesome and infinite God doesn't force himself on us, as you just pointed out, right? And so that he would sort of expect creatures to act that way with one another, it's just not consistent with us being made in the image of God.
Yeah. Well, how does that, this obedience, how does this apply to each role, like the husband and the wife?
Yes.
And I guess we can lead into headship and submission into it. I guess it kind of all flows,
Yes. And I think a key sort of, my book, there's probably two key points. And one of them is, okay, exactly how do we understand, right? If headship and submission, or obedience, you could say authority and obedience, headship and submission are sort of synonyms. If they don't mean master and slave, okay, which is not consistent with human dignity, what do they mean? Well, again, scripturally, we see St. Paul saying, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, right? And that husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So right in there, we say, oh, well, if a husband is called to relate as head to his wife by loving her in a sacrificial way, right? He gave himself totally, gave himself for her. That true, authentic, life-giving headship, right, is a laying down of one's life. It is expressed in a gesture of gift. Okay. And so if a husband is expressing that headship through laying down his life, through all manner of giving, which we kind of go into in the book, then first and foremost, submission or obedience to that gesture on his part is going to be a form of receptivity. Okay, that submission, obedience is a form of receiving what another offers, saying, yes, I want what you want for me, right? That, again, that sort of dynamic that we talked about earlier with obedience, that submission is a form of receptivity. Now, on one level, some people might interpret receptivity as passivity, right? It's just sort of passive. Oh, I don't do anything. Do I have any agency? I'm just receiving. I'm just getting. Oh, that sounds, either lame or it sounds easy. It's neither, right? And so really, I think what my book attempts to do is to go into the complexity of what is involved in the disposition of receptivity. So again, we keep looking at Mary, keep looking at the church, but nonetheless, if at its foundation, true authority, right? Again, authority is sort of a life-giving force. It is a kind of giving. Then receptivity is going to be the way in which we understand submission to that. And so that, I think, it on one level takes the sting out a little. You're like, okay, maybe removing some of the fear. And I think you hear that a lot sometimes. When priests are brave enough to sort of preach on this epistle, they'll emphasize, okay, yes, authority is not meant to be controlling or abusing. It's sacrificing and giving, and yay, that's key, right? This key to this dynamic. But what we tend not to dwell on as much or to meditate upon is, okay, then what does submission look like, right? What does it look like? Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing all this for me, right? Is that all that's involved in my role as wife? And why that way? Why husband to wife and not wife to husband, right? Is there, it seems like it's asymmetrical, right? There's something asymmetrical about giving and receiving. There's something non-identical about those two parts. They're not non-interchangeable, right?
Right.
So are men somehow by nature suited to be these sort of givers and women these receivers? But that's really the second thread in the book. And I think I relied so much on Edith Stein, known to us now as St. Teresa Benedict of the Cross, who really, I think, gives some beautiful insights in looking at, she looks at the physical differences between men and women as being just a hint, right? Just an exterior expression of interior differences that, in fact, really coincide with a man being oriented toward giving and a woman toward receiving. And so that's something that, we can talk about right now, but that is a hint that, actually, there may be something in our nature that inclines us to this way of relating. And I don't want to eventually touch on the fact that women do give and men do receive, but it's in a little bit more of a subtle way. But in looking at the way in which men and women are designed physically, right? A woman's body, we know her body physically, right, is unique because it has this capacity to receive and nurture, to accommodate another person within her. Okay. Right. And that's not just, we don't think that human persons are just bodies, right? That we're not just physical, right? That we're physical and spiritual, so that any physical differences are really just expressions of interior differences. And so women do exude capacities for intuition, empathy, adaptability, these sort of interior gifts, which I think John Paul II would later refer to as the feminine genius. We kind of hear that word tossed around a lot. He kind of coined it, but I think Edith Stein described it best. She says, a woman is person-oriented. Everything in her body sort of reflects the fact that she's very oriented toward persons and relationships. Now, on the one hand, it might sound like, aren't all people oriented toward relationships? Like, are men not? I would say no. Men absolutely are oriented toward persons and relationships, but not in the direct way. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If a woman is sort of oriented relationally, first and foremost, a man seems to be oriented toward people, and he relates to people through his work, through his actions. She says a man is action oriented because look at his body. His body is not designed to receive a person within it, right?
Right.
His body doesn't have that capacity. But a man's body is distinguished by size and strength, by a certain aptitude, capacity for action, for work on the world outside of him. There's something exterior, right? Outgoing about that, about his gifts, right? And so a man seems more designed to act on the world, right? We see all the different ways, that he's designed. And of course, in general, having a body means we can act on the world, but a man's is capacitated in a very sort of unique way toward exterior action. And because of that, and this is a key point, because a man is oriented to relate to others through his actions, right? His actions of whatever, fighting, defending, building, that always they serve persons, right? So he relates to persons through those actions, right? But nonetheless, it's not quite as direct as that woman's relational orientation and intuition toward the person. But because a man is oriented toward action, he tends to identify himself with his actions. He tends to identify and get a sense of his manhood, his personhood through what he does. Right. And that's a distinction, because when we do tend to see in all ages, right, men trying to prove themselves, right? They're going to score that touchdown or, hunt that deer or some accomplishment. Like, look what I did, right? And it's very important when he does something and it's a success and it's affirmed, usually first and foremost by the men in his life, right? His dad or his brothers or, other men, right? When his actions are respected and received well by others, he feels affirmed. Whereas with women, you don't see women usually running around trying to prove that they're women. Right. Women, that's not quite how we operate, and Edith Stein says that's because women, because we receive persons within our body, because our body is always reminding us that we're female, right? Right. That we tend to have a kind of, as she puts it, a closer union. We experience a closer union with our body and tend to identify with our body, right? We say, hey, this is me. This is me right here. Right. And we tend to make more of a distinction between who I am and what I do than men do. And this is a key point to keep in mind when we're relating with our husbands, our sons, the men in our life, that there's a kind of, I guess I'd call it a difference in sexual self-understanding that, and again, both of them, it's just a matter of emphasis. And both of them reveal a key truth about the person and about the body. Both of them are also vulnerable to problems, right? When we women kind of over-identify with our body, it can lead us to some dangerous roads. We can have a reduced sense of identity and think, I'm just my body, right? If my body is not perfect, I'm not perfect. And we can go down that road. Body image issues is very painful and very common for women, right? Yeah. Men, on the other hand, don't seem to struggle with that as much. But if they're identifying with their actions, what happens when their actions fail, right? Dealing with failure, disability, unemployment, those things can be, what's the word? Really they can seriously cut into a man's sense of identity. They can be really debilitating is the word I'm thinking of. Right. They can be debilitating in a way that women don't have. Doesn't mean we're not disappointed when we have failures. Doesn't mean we're not upset by them, but they don't tend to reduce our sense of identity. They don't tend to make us doubt whether we're a woman, right? And so because of this difference in sort of their sense of sexual identity, we see that when we relate to one another in a relationship, that it's actually going to affect the way in which we experience love. Okay. So when a man, basically the question becomes, how does a man feel loved? What makes a man feel loved versus what makes a woman feel loved? And I think as women, we think, well, I feel loved when I receive a person, right? And how do we receive persons? Well, often we receive persons through the gifts that they offer, just in a dating relationship, right? Someone asked me out, he brought me flowers, he brought me a gift. We have this sense of when we receive something from another, we feel that we're receiving the other. And so we tend to experience love when we are receiving something. But that's not identical to the way men experience love. They tend to experience love when what they offer is well received. Right. And so I think that kind of hit me one time when I was trying to figure out what to get for my husband for like his birthday.
That's honestly, that is always the struggle. It's like, I know you, but like, what do I give you?
What do I give you? And some people just have this amazing knack and are just fabulous gift givers. And maybe I just struggle with that. But
no, same, honestly.
But then I realized like I struggle with my dad as well. And I realized, of course, I'm going to be making gestures of gift giving toward them and thoughtfulness, and they're going to appreciate that gesture. But I realize that deep down, what makes my husband feel happiest and feel most loved is when I get really excited about what he gave to me. Same thing with my dad. And I realized, it's part of that identity is they're identifying with their actions, right? And that encompasses a lot. Their words, their opinions, their ideas, their actual gifts, their acts of service. There's so many ways in which we sort of communicate and act. But when I receive well what he offers to me, that's actually what makes him feel loved. And I think it's all in that passage of St. Paul, the one about submission and headship. The very last line is, so husbands, love your wives, and wives, respect your husbands. And I always remember feeling like, well, you're sort of almost expecting to see husbands love your wives, wives love your husbands. Why does he say respect there? I think because for a man, respect is a synonym for appreciation, for gratitude of the way in which he has expressed his love through gift. And so really, that's the way in which men experience love. So we can do a million things for our husbands and families, and as wives and mothers, of course we do. We do a bunch of things, right? But if I'm not simultaneously receiving whatever he does for me with appreciation and recognition, he may not be experiencing love. And I do remember giving a talk on this at one point, and one of the men in the audience said, I'm a marriage counselor. He says, I've counseled hundreds of couples through the years, and not one couple that I counseled in not a single situation was the man experiencing respect.
Oh, wow.
I know. And again, like, that's no judgment. Maybe they were mistreating their wives. Like, I don't know the situations, but simply to illustrate the fact that for whatever reason, if respect isn't present, if that receptive appreciation and recognition of what he's doing for me, if it's not present, there's a problem.
Right.
And so when you pan out a little and see, okay, there is a complex dynamic which absolutely mirrors, again, the dynamic of a gift, right? A free offering and a free reception. Every single example of gift giving involves that. There's freedom in both sides, right? You can't force someone to give you a gift, and you can't force someone to receive a gift, right? Either way, sort of it ruins everything. And but when you look at the words of Scripture, to me, that is authority and submission. It is giving and receiving. Our Lord at the Last Supper, right? When he's washing his apostles' feet, he's like, yeah, this is authority as service, right? This is what I do. I get out, authority as service. When you look at our at God in creation, right? God shows us his power and his might initially through creation, right? Through this free and amazing gift. So one of the reasons I think that we bristle when we think about authority and submission is because we think of the way fallen man has abused authority over time, right? We think of bad examples of hurting people, harming people, controlling and manipulating, and all of those things are scary and awful consequences of fallen man's abuse of this mission. But if we want to understand it properly, we just have to look at at the original meaning, right? Of headship, and that it is gift Again, though, what this means for marriage, however, is that it takes two to tango, right? We're talking about a
Mm-hmm.
complex dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no one thing, if wives come to me saying, you know, how can I make my husband give better? How can I fix him? He does this, he does that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, number one, we're asking the wrong question. You can't make him, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Just in the same way, he can't make you receive better. We can't change each other. What we can do, though, I think, is focus on what can I do to receive better? What can I do to communicate to my husband that he's loved and vice versa, right? From his
Mm-hmm.
perspective, how can he give better? How can he serve my needs better and make me happy? If we can focus on our own, often we'll find that that will be the key to encouraging and inspiring the other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so any
Mm-hmm.
sense of, I'm going to make this work, I'm going to make this happen, I'm going to do enough loving for the two of us, right?
Right.
That's it's just not how, right? That's not even how
Yeah.
God works with us, as you pointed out.
Right.
So
Yeah.
keeping that in mind, it is a complex dynamic. But instead of focusing on everything he's doing wrong or everything she's doing wrong, I think there's plenty of space for us to look at our the individual areas that we have to give and to receive that affect the other. How could I maybe be doing this better? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's usually it's enough for us to make some good resolutions that often do bear fruit in a
For
marriage.
yeah. Well, the thing that makes me think of is I guess that what I'm trying to work on currently is
Yeah.
um excuse me. And I got this from my sister-in-law, actually. She mentioned it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. She said, when my husband comes home from work, they have kids and everything, and you're usually in the middle making dinner, and it's witching hour when everybody's losing it, and,
Oh, yes.
they're ready to go to bed or whatever it is. And you might have had a horrible day. She said, when he comes through the door, I try and greet him with a smile. How was your day? A kiss and a hug. And I was like, that's so beautiful. I was like, I'm going to do that. Optimist here. Like, let's go. And then the next day, guess who failed? This one. Because you don't think about like when that person comes in. My first thought was, oh, okay, great. I'm getting some, backup here. He's coming to help. Instead of thinking of him of like, okay, he's going to be getting home. He had a busy day, lots of meetings, or maybe he had a horrible drive home, whatever. Thinking about that person and thinking like, just smile at him. Just give him a hug before you start being like, guess what this one did? And guess what, and I don't know. It was like, oh, like this is a beautiful way of just receiving because he's coming home to me and I'm receiving him home. Like he can just be home. He doesn't have to be home and in the best mood, which by the way, when I do greet him like that, I see him change from like he was tired to him being in a good mood. And I don't know. It's the same for when he's in a better mood. It's easier for me to be in a better mood, but it doesn't quite change the way that this seems to change when he gets home. Like for me, it's I can get in a better mood, if he's like, okay, like, what if I do this for you? What if you just go take 5 minutes to yourself? Like he does something for me. And it's so interesting. You said that like it's doing and then receiving. And we think, receiving's easy. Like, sure, thanks for the gift. Right? But really it's like, oh no, I just have to be gracious most of the time and think of the other person.
No, I love the way gracious, right? It has the same root, right? The root of gracious is the word of grace, is the root of grace. It's the root of gratitude. It's the word gratis. And you know what that means? It means free, right? I don't have to respond this way, but I'm going to freely respond this way. And it's everything. I struggled with the same thing. I still do, right? In terms of, but especially when the kids were little, I remember waiting in the window, just counting the minutes, right? But reflecting now, realizing, okay, so he's had a day as well. We both had hard days, right? But he has had this day doing stuff for me. He's doing stuff to ultimately serve me, right? And so if the first thing that I do is greet him with a frown and more demands, it's kind of like not acknowledging what he's already done. It's like, oh, it's never enough. It's never enough. When really a smile, like you said, a smile, Mother Teresa, somebody once said something that like a smile costs you nothing. Have you heard that phrase? A smile costs you nothing.
No, but I feel like I've heard threads of like I feel Audrey Hepburn might have said so. I don't know, but I haven't heard that particular line.
And one time, Mother Teresa, I think, was commenting on that. And she said, actually, sometimes a smile can be the most expensive thing on the world. It's extremely costly, right?
Yes.
Because it takes so much. So, but I think if we recognize what our smile does, what it can do for our husband, we're going to be more than willing to do it, you know?
Yeah.
I know for me, in addition to the smile, it was, I have a whole bunch of stuff I need, right? And of course, he wants to serve me and please me and help me. But my problem was I would tell all the things at once. Well, this went wrong and this broken and I need this. And all of a sudden it would like, here's my list. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is, again, even men's brains. Look, the science is there. The science is out on men's and women's brains. They are different. And men do tend to approach problems more linearly, one thing at a time, right? They focus on the one thing, they can abstract and zoom in on that thing. We are very good at dealing with a lot of things at once because that's what you have to do when you're dealing with a person. And that has its own gifts and sort of associated, sub gifts like multitasking. But for men, if we give our husbands our list of everything we need and what would make things better all at once, number one, it's overwhelming. Number two, they're not quite sure what they need to prioritize first. I can't tell you how many times I have asked my husband to do something for me and he's gladly doing it. And in the middle of him doing it, tell him something else I need. And I expect him to know what's like, it's like triage, right? What's actually, what needs priority? Because sometimes sometimes, I'm sorry, something else does need priority. You have to quit what I just asked you to do and do this thing, right?
Right.
But recognizing that maybe it's not his strong point to decide. He's trying to please me. He's trying to serve me. So I have to discern what are the things I want to prioritize. And it is important for us it doesn't mean he should be guessing all our needs. Absolutely. We need to communicate what would help us, serve us, and make us happy to him. That helps him, right?
Right.
That's not the same as nagging, but when the power of a smile, the power of us having thought a little before we present him with something that we really need or desire. A lot of times it really is those little things that can just help open up a space for him to feel loved. And then that would inspire him to want to keep making us happy. When he sees that what he does makes us happy, it usually inspires him to want to do more. And so it is hard if he's not doing enough or we feel that he's focusing on the wrong thing, right? It can be a challenge. But to remember that no matter what's going wrong, there's probably something's going right. Are we recognizing those things?
Right.
I had the privilege recently of giving a talk about this to a group of just men. And so one of them said, when my wife smiles at me, when she appreciates me, when she receives me well, right? When she's doing that, he said, it fills my sails. And I feel like I can just take on the world. And it was,
oh my gosh,
it was this darling man. And I was like,
and you don't hear men talk a lot about like that. And so it's like, oh my gosh, the impact of, me smiling at you or being like, thank you, is like,
I know.
Well, continue. Sorry.
Just that I think maybe it was because it was in that all male setting that it was just, they were a little more open. And I was like, oh, I need to take notes because it was very moving for me to hear that and to realize just as they don't always understand everything that's going on with us, right? That we can't have almost the arrogance to think we totally understand them and know everything. Like sometimes we need to learn and realize, oh, I just didn't realize how you received that remark, or I just didn't realize what that meant to you. And again, that goes both ways, this sort of humility before the other, and recognizing the power that we have to uplift them or to sometimes wound them.
Right. Well, it makes me think of, and this phrase has been twisted and changed so many times. But the phrase that behind every great man is a great woman. And I love it just like that because it's that example where it's like, how many men have gone out and done great things? We see this through history. What if they wouldn't have done them if their wife or whoever, or their mother, the great woman behind it was like, no, you go do that. Like, it makes me think of, you know who Tim Ballard is?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So his wife, he was like, I don't know if I want to go on this mission and, save the kids and all this stuff. And she was like, you will not risk my salvation. You will go. I'm like, she was throwing him to the wolves, but she also believed that he would. She wouldn't have said that if she didn't think he was good enough or great enough. And I don't know. I was just like, oh my gosh, like, why is this phrase looked down upon? Like, if women didn't do this, I don't know. I don't know how many men won't think they could do it. I don't know.
I think you phrased it just right, because you said she believed that he could. We underestimate the power that our confidence in our husbands, the power that it has for them. Okay. Because a synonym for confidence is trust, right? If we trust in them, right, it shows that we believe they can do it. It is another form of that respect. Any kind of giving and receiving dynamic is absolutely rooted in trust, right? When he offers something to me, he's trusting, right, that I'm going to receive it well and not reject him or wound him, right? And when I receive something from him, I'm trusting that it is a gift, right? That it's not meant to control me, that I'm trusting that it is, in fact, an expression of his love. So the temptation for the human race has always been to distrust a gift, right? Adam and Eve, they didn't trust that God's commandment to them was for their flourishing and protection. It was, the devil said, no, that's the manipulation. Don't trust. He's just trying to use you. He's trying to, right? And so when we say, honey, I believe in you, I trust you, it builds them up. It is an expression, right, of our receptivity. And so we all need that, right? Our kids need that. Our spouses need that. And it really is part of our feminine genius, right? Edith Stein says that one of the things that we have as women, a power sort of that we have, is we love to nurture, right? We love to foster organic development. And so clearly in the example of a child, right? You have your 3-year-old child. Have you ever sat around at a park with other moms with their 3-year-old kids? Well, all of us can tell the other about our child and their gifts and their strengths. And well, this one will definitely be my president of the United States. This one, I know this one will definitely be like, we see potential. We have this gift of recognizing potential. Now, potential by definition is something that's not there yet, right? But we do have this capacity to kind of recognize it and kind of nurture it. And sure, sometimes we can go overboard, right? We'll sometimes make really bad mistakes because we saw potential in a guy that like totally wasn't there. But in a very real sense, it's an important gift that we have that we use to nurture our children, but also other children, right? We might not ever have our own children, but it's a gift to see potential and to sort of nurture it. Spouses need that too. Edith Stein says husbands need that. We need to say, you can do that. I know you can do that.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to believe in themselves. It's not a feature of males, right? To believe in themselves. They always need someone else believing in them, right? That's why they crave respect so much. They have to do this thing that others say, yeah, good job. Oh, now they feel affirmed, right? And so not something they provide for themselves. And so again, it comes early on, from that kind of encouragement, and it as a child, but then certainly as a wife, when we believe in him and we entrust things, when we say even something like many women, something like, let's say I'm letting my husband watch our children, or he is going to do the dishes, right? He's going to do something that maybe, most of the time falls under my domain. Not everybody, right? But, and then the first thing we say is, oh, well, you did it wrong. Well, why didn't you change your diaper? Oh, you loaded the dishwasher wrong, right? When we don't even believe in them to do the small things, right? Even if they don't do it exactly the way we hoped or whatever.
Yeah.
When we say, I don't trust in you to do this, they're not going to continue doing it, right? Because that's not how they operate. So recognizing the power that our trust has for them. I believe you can do this hard thing. And that applies to a lot of things within marriage, which we'll probably get into some specifics later. But what the power of a wife's confidence, what it does for him, it fills his sails, right? It lifts him and makes him believe in himself.
And what is the Because we talked about it. It almost sounds like there is a mutual submission going on a little bit. So what is that? How's that
Beautiful.
different from, headship authority and,
Yes.
the other one?
So many people ignore this line, right? It comes right
Right?
before the line about wives submit to your husbands. St. Paul says, submit yourselves to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then he goes, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. He gives the whole dynamic. And then
Right.
husbands, love your wives. So what this means is, right, number one, we are all male and female, right? All human persons, all Christians, right? We are called to be submissive out of reverence for Christ, which two things there. Let's start substituting that word receptivity, right? We're supposed to be receptive. We're supposed to relate to one another as though it were in the context of our greater relationship to Christ. We need to see the day in and day out duties of husband to wife as an expression of our receptivity to Christ. So that means, yeah, there's times when receiving well from my husband is challenging and I fail and I don't do it well. And it's hence, there's times, but in other words, there's times when it causes me pain, right?
Right.
I can subordinate that to say, okay, all right, God, I tried my best, didn't go well, but I'm going to offer this pain to you because ultimately I am receiving my vocation to marriage from you and I'm relating to you through this relationship. For men, it's the same thing, but their reception of God's will, their receptivity, their submission is expressed through their specific relationship, which means they show their obedience to God through stepping up and being the giver in chief. Yeah. And I think about St. Joseph, right? St. Joseph did not relish the idea of stepping into this drama of Mary and Jesus, right? In the gospel, when it says, when he found out about Mary, he had resolved to divorce her quietly. Now, some people think that, it was because he thought maybe there was another human male in the picture and he was just going to, not expose Mary to the law, but just step aside. But several fathers of the church say, no, he would have known that Mary would not have, been impure, that this must have been through divine intervention and that something going on here was God's divine plan. He didn't feel worthy. How is he supposed to step in and be the head of this divine family? Mary being without sin and, her being, pregnant with the Son of God. Like, how is he going to step in? He didn't feel worthy. He didn't feel capable, right? And yet God says, no, I want you to do this, right? So Joseph submits to God, right? By saying, okay, I'm going to step up and be the head of this holy family. So seeing the duties of, in my book, I call it giver in chief, right? It's not easy, right? Stepping up to that self-sacrifice, but that's his, and headship and the responsibility that goes with headship, right? That is his way of receiving God's will. And actually, it was at the same talk that one of the men came up to me afterwards and said, what's interesting is that even later on, when Mary and Joseph had to flee to Egypt, right? Because Herod was on the move to destroy Jesus. Why didn't the angel appear to Mary? Why didn't the angel just say, Mary, they're on the hunt, wake up Joseph, get going? Of course, he would have done it, right?
Yeah.
No, instead, he goes to Joseph, which means Joseph has to step up and say, okay, we're leaving in the middle of the night. We're fleeing to Egypt, right? Yeah. And not only that, but Mary has to accept that. Yeah. Mary herself was called to submit to Joseph's human initiative and authority and go, okay, honey, and so, wow. Even in the Holy Family, right? We see not just submission to God directly, but submission to God through that relationship. And
which, if we humanify, let's practically see this pregnant woman, your husband wakes you up in the middle of the night. You maybe have just fallen asleep and he's like, hey, honey, we got to go to Egypt now. And you're sitting there like, now? You want to go to Egypt now? Like, that would be my, I'd be like, I know. We're going to go in the morning when I'm like, she's just so like, okay, like, I trust you. We're going to do it.
Yes,
like, I think people think of like Bible stories as like, oh, wow, how beautiful. It's like, can you imagine now? Like if you were Mary being like, sure, honey, let's go to Egypt. That
No.
sounds great while I'm super pregnant in the
No, and
middle of the
actually,
night.
this is after she's got the baby. Can you imagine?
Oh,
That
right.
happened
That's
to us.
right.
That happened to us once. I had a newborn, right? And my husband's dad got sick really suddenly, and it was right after I had my fourth baby. And it was like, honey, yeah, maybe you could fly out there in a couple of weeks. It was an absolute no way am I putting my newborn and my three other little kids in a van and driving 22 hours. Like it's not that I didn't have the heart to go. I didn't think it was possible, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and then through a series of amazing, I think, providential events, we just decided to do it. And it was amazing because we made it and we were able to talk to his dad for the last time because things were
Wow.
much faster than we thought. So again, God's
Right.
hand was in it the whole way. But I was
Yeah.
just thinking like, yeah, no, that's it, right. But that Mary was asked to trust Joseph. If the angel had appeared to Mary directly, okay, she would have had that absolute assurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is definitely the right thing to do, right?
Right.
But instead, she was asked to trust Joseph. So Mary was not spared that opportunity to put her trust in a human guy who, guess what, might be wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And, maybe we can talk about this as it goes on, but, what happens when he's wrong about something, and how does
Right.
that response factor in? But nonetheless, you had asked about mutual submission. So I think recognizing that the headship and submission within this marital relationship
Mm-hmm.
are both expressions of submission to God. And that will hopefully
Mm.
help order them and help them to not be selfish and turned in on themselves. I mean, things can get ugly. Things can get really ugly and unhealthy in a marriage. And so ultimately, we're not really going to be able to live fruitful headship and submission in our marriage without opening ourselves up to God's grace and ultimately seeing, okay, whatever sufferings this is causing me, I'm going to tie that in to my relationship with you. It's helping us, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't deal with God directly. We deal with him in and through these
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And so there's that opportunity there. But it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be open or it can get really hard.
Yeah. So this is part of this fruitful suffering in marriage, right? Where
Yes.
it's not all roses and oh yes, honey, and let me just smile at you. Like let's I'd love to talk a little bit about that because I think we all
Yes.
can relate to that.
Yes. Because even you and I have both, thought of examples where something went sideways or, maybe we tried and failed or, again, I think sometimes from a guy's perspective, right? Maybe they tried to do something nice for us, right? But maybe that nice thing was something we didn't really want, or maybe we hinted we wanted something else, or we tried that the last time, remember? And that didn't work, whatever it was, right? The gesture wasn't what we hoped for, right?
Hmm.
And so maybe we didn't receive it well because it was like, that's not what I like, or whatever. Or I don't want it done that way, or I asked you to do this thing. We've got all manner of things that we where we know what we want or we think we know what we want,
Right, right.
right? And so when that happens, again, there's pain, right? There's pain to a guy when we don't receive him well. There's pain for us when he doesn't give well. There's opportunities for pain. And one thing that we do want to think about when we think about the concept of pain or suffering is even in the physical world, there's different kinds of pain. There's pain when something is wrong, when there's a warning, right? If I'm burning my hand on the stove, man, that pain is telling me I better get my hand away, right?
Hmm.
It's not good to keep enduring that pain, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
some pain is a warning that there is something wrong and harmful, that there's a danger, right?
Hmm.
And so again, within a marriage, I would connect that to the pain of abuse. Okay.
Hmm.
Abuse, whether it be physical, emotional, it is not, I don't think there's any way that you can interpret that as a gift, right? Because
Right.
it enriches the recipient.
Hmm.
And abuse robs you of your dignity. And so there is many reasons, right, where you need to step away. Doesn't mean that a marriage can't be worked on or healed, and it's difficult. And we're not going to go into that all now, but
Hmm.
I think it's important when we're talking about this to distinguish. But there's another kind of pain, right? Gosh, the pain of having a child, the pain of
Hmm.
working out, right? My
Hmm.
husband and I started a little exercise program recently, and I
Hmm.
mean, pain, right? But it's a good pain because it's a fruitful pain, right? It's going to bear fruit in us getting stronger and healthier for the second half of our family that are still young. We need to keep
Hmm.
ourselves, right?
Hmm.
Or certainly the pain of bringing forth a new child, right? growth and change are often painful. And so
Mm-hmm.
distinguishing from pain that requires some sort of change, like abuse, but recognizing that, yeah, it's going to hurt. And early in my marriage, I had a conversation with a beautiful woman who said, you know, one day early in my marriage, I worked all day to just do the laundry and clean, and I made this beautiful dinner and I set the table. She just tried to do something really special for her husband. And he had come home that day and he was really stressed about something totally unrelated, right?
Mm-hmm.
He
Mm-hmm.
didn't he didn't recognize what
Oh,
she had done
yeah.
for him. And it hurt. And I think it was her own mom that said, this is where we have to recognize that we're relating straight to God. I did this
Mm-hmm.
for you, God. I knew that I was doing my best to try to do something beautiful, live my vocation, take care of my family. I did this for you. It didn't go appreciated by him. Um, but by recognizing that it's part of how we relate to God, that pain
Mm-hmm.
could be fruitful, right? What are
Mm-hmm.
you trying to show me? How are you trying to bring me to you? There are so many times I don't think I could talk to anyone who wouldn't relate an example of good change, growth
Mm-hmm.
that didn't somehow come through pain, some
Yeah.
suffering, some loss, some disappointment, some hurt, because those are the things that open us up to God. I mean, they're the opportunity to open us to God, right?
Yeah.
They are the opportunity to really bring into focus some of our flaws, like, wow, I am really proud. I had no idea how proud I was, or I had no
Mm-hmm.
idea how vain I was, or I had no
Mm-hmm.
idea um, how controlling I was trying to be. Again, often
Right. Yeah.
suffering can shed a light on things that God is trying to help form us and shape us. And so, unless, again, we
Mm-hmm.
keep our eye on the prize that all of this, whether I have a super happy marriage or a marriage that's more fraught with crosses
Mm-hmm.
of any sort, whatever it is, this is
Mm-hmm.
my vocation. And God is going to give me the opportunity to be sanctified
Mm-hmm.
through this vocation
Yeah.
and help us. I think it doesn't mean we don't try to work on our marriages. It doesn't mean we don't try to make things better in so far as we can to inspire the other to nurture love, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to
Mm-hmm.
give up on it, but there is a place to put that in recognizing, okay, in the greater scheme of things, what are you trying to teach me, Lord? What are you trying to teach
Mm-hmm.
me? And the more we open that up to our relationship with Christ, the more I think it can help us to weather the storms and recognize that this is not going to be easy. And when it
Yeah.
is easy, we need to thank God, wow, this was awesome. It's a glimpse of heaven, right?
Yeah.
And those glimpses can hopefully carry us through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Alice von Hildebrand wrote a book called Letters to a Young Bride. I don't know
Ooh,
if
I don't think
anybody
I've
ever,
heard
I
of
think
that.
somebody gave that to me when I was engaged, and it's been ages since I picked it up. So I should probably pick it up again now that I'm an old bride. But one thing she said, and I was thinking about this the other day because we just had the Feast of the Transfiguration.
Mhm.
She says when you first fall in love with your spouse, you don't see any of their faults because you probably don't even know them yet, right? You just see them and how you fell in love with them. And
Mhm.
she says that's kind of like the transfiguration. She calls that the Tabor vision because Mount Tabor, right, was the
Mhm.
mountain where they saw Jesus in his fullness, in his glory. It's like divinity radiating from him, right? And that vision was very purposefully meant to prepare the disciples for what was about to happen to Jesus, right? He's about to be
Oh.
crucified, and you better hang on tight to that vision because that's going to
Mhm.
get you through this
Mhm.
and hopefully help you to hang on to the reality of who he was and is.
Mhm.
And she said, we've got to do the same with our spouses. We've got to remember the person that we fell in love with. We have to
Mhm.
focus on all of the things we love about them to to remind ourselves again and again
Mhm.
to get us through those hard times. Because, man, I sure hope he's doing that with me, right?
Mhm.
I'm not
Mhm.
exactly the same person. I mean, I am the same person, but we've been through so much together and
Right.
through so much experiences. You grow in your gifts and strengths, but also your flaws kind of come into full relief. And so,
Yeah.
how much is he enduring of me? And I hope that to try to maintain, she says, always try to maintain that Tabor vision of your spouse when things get hard because they will,
Well,
and you
let's.
can't predict how, but they will.
Sorry, I'll let you finish. I didn't
Oh,
want to
that's it.
interrupt.
That's it. Yeah.
Oh, well, I was gonna say it's and this is hard. I think I know for me sometimes, especially when we are going through tough things, and I'm like, you're just frustrated. But
Yeah.
um, really seeing that other person as God sees you, because God calls you by the good things. Only the devil calls you by your sins, you know? So it's, I mean, of course, we're supposed to deal with reality of like not ignoring the things, especially things like abuse or horrible, horrible things, you know, never ignore that.
Yeah.
Um, but truly like call them in the everyday things, like call them like God does by the gifts, by the good things. And it's hard.
It's true. And there,
Sometimes, you know,
you
it's
know,
just hard because of like how imperfect, you know, I
yeah.
am and we are. And yeah.
And there's that familiarity. Familiarity breeds contempt.
Yeah.
And it does. And so instead of looking at them, stepping back and looking at your spouse with his dignity and with what you fell in love with, we sometimes don't do that because we get so familiar.
Hmm.
And I think it was the same friend that told me about when she made the dinner and it wasn't appreciated. She said, also, one day I looked around and the house was just a terrible mess. And she was pregnant. It was hard, whatever
Yeah. Yeah.
happens. But then they found out some random person was coming over and suddenly she scrambled and got everything looking nice. And she said,
Mhm.
I sat there and I thought, how is it that pride motivated me to do something that love didn't motivate me to do? And so
Oh,
I
that
know, right? It's
is,
still like I'm telling
no.
you, like I'm still working on the house thing, but in some way recognizing that, right? Even just the little things, right?
All
Okay, I'm
right.
gonna pick up those socks, or okay, maybe I didn't make that mess, but I'm gonna do this, or I'm gonna do this deed. And because I love you more
Hmm.
than anybody in the world. Why am I not? And so you have that safe space with someone that you
Hmm.
love,
Hmm.
right? But actually, we need to try to nurture that relationship, right? Let's
Yeah.
take care of these things. Just like
Yeah.
and this is maybe as lame, but sometimes when I'm talking about marriage to college students, I'm like, what if somebody gave you an outfit and said, this is the outfit that the only outfit you're ever going to get to wear for the rest of your life? How would you treat those clothes,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Would you mend them, wash them, hang them up, or would you just keep, you know, wow, right?
Yeah.
If this is the relationship that I found myself to till death, right? Yeah, it can be awful, but I can also try to take care of it
Hmm.
and do what I can to nurture it and to remind myself of the dignity and the beauty of this person. And it's going
Hmm.
to make things better. It's not going to, there's no guarantees with a relationship that involves two free beings, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
nonetheless, reminding ourselves, no, there's no set of rules. This has to be perfect for my husband, and this is no. We do our best, but husband and wife, right? Finding little ways to nurture this gift,
Hmm.
which again will be hard and sometimes won't be noticed, but it is what we can do to take care of this relationship.
Hmm. If you could give women one piece of advice, it could be on this topic, it could be on something else, what would it be?
I think that's a good one. Just one? I'm just teasing.
Just one.
I
You can give
love
a
to talk.
couple.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, 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 no. Again, I think it would be to really, it sounds boring, right? It sounds boring and it sounds like work. Cultivate that spiritual life because if it's true that women find a deep fulfillment in relationships, right? That we're sort of made for it, we put it above all else. Every relationship in your life at some point or another is going to let you down. And so if I
Hmm.
define myself by that relationship, I'm going to be really hurt.
Hmm.
Edith Stein says, no, 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 no. You don't go against the grain. We are made for relationship. Cultivate that spousal relationship with our Lord, because that way we're going to be able to take all of those things that we can't control, right?
Hmm.
In stride. We're going to be able to give them meaning. We're going to be able to almost marvel at what he's going to do with us, because that's the nature of being the one that bears fruit, right? I'm not the source of my children, right? I needed
Hmm.
my husband for that, but they did. I was a part of it, right? They came through me, right? We don't know the spiritual fruits that our Lord is going to bring through us. We
Hmm.
don't know. It's in a sense a surprise. So even if it's the tiniest little bits, even if it's 5 minutes at the beginning of the day, right? There's times in our life where all we can do is 5 minutes, but cultivate the spousal relationship with our Lord. Somebody wrote recently, making a date. She said she made a date with our Lord, and she wasn't even talking about going to adoration. She just literally went and had coffee and did some spiritual reading. It was just like, I'm making a
Hmm.
date with my Lord.
Hmm.
Cultivate that And whether your marriage is filled with, exhausting joys or painful, thorny crosses, because things can go anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
That fostering that will hopefully give you the presence of mind to see him in each situation and in each person. I just finished reading it. There's a book I want to recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of Carol Houselander? She was a kind of a mystic British writer in the 1950s, and she wrote this book. She wrote many things, but it's called The Reed of God. And in this book, she talks about this whole idea of receptivity and that we're all called to bring forth, like Mary, our Lord, right? We're all
Mm-hmm.
called to bring forth Christ as a fruit. And so she also challenges us to see Christ in every person. And she says, even in the most hardened sinner, Christ is there. He's there like he's there in the sepulcher. It's like he's there in the tomb, but he's there. So
Mm-hmm.
keeping our spiritual life going, right? Keeping it not on life
Mm-hmm.
support, keeping it going is
Right.
going to hopefully help us to have the right perspective. It is
Yeah.
so easy to lose perspective in a difficult marriage. It's easy to lose perspective with our children who we think we own and control, and often we don't realize
Right.
that we don't own and control them until they start making their own decisions and they're adults. And then it becomes this new, huge vulnerability of, oh my goodness, I was never in control, right? God shows us, He
Mm-hmm.
shows us
Mm-hmm.
through our joys and often through our sufferings. He shows us how much He loves us and how much He wants us to just open our arms and receive Him. So,
Mm-hmm.
long answer to a short question is just don't give up on cultivating that relationship with our Lord. You will fail a million times over, but don't give up.
Well, Mrs. Stanford, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about this important topic.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy.
And for anyone who is looking to dive in more, this is the book. This is what it looks like. It's called The Obedience Paradox, Finding True Freedom in Marriage. And it goes even deeper than we did in the conversation on marriage, all of the topics under that, including practical situations that happen every single day in marriage. And thank you so much for listening to the Woman Aesthetic podcast. Let's connect on Instagram at the Woman Aesthetic. And if you're loving the podcast, I would be so honored if you'd go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a review. Until next time.